Hello everybody and welcome back to the flight deck. I've been asked a few times about where to find certain information on charts and how to look up certain things for takeoff and landing and how to get around the airports. So I decided I would do a series of tutorial videos that would show you where to find information on the different charts that we use when flying in Microsoft Flight Simulator, and more specifically when flying on VATSIM. Now, a couple points to make out before we start. I am not a trained IFR pilot. My flying was only ever done VFR, so I've never been formally trained on how to read and interpret these charts. But I have learned from real pilots. I have learned from years of simming experience and reading through them and asking questions. So this is how I read them and the information I get from them. I may not know everything that's on these charts, but I know enough to get by in the sim, and I know where to find, pretty much all of the information you're going to need to successfully fly in Flight Sim and on VATSIM as well. So we're going to break this series up into a number of parts. We'll cover the charts that you use when you're at an airport for both your departure and arrival procedures on the ground. We'll do another one on your departure. We'll do one on the arrivals, and then another one for a typical ILS landing. As I am from the Toronto area, we will be using the charts from Pearson International Airport, the big major Toronto airport. So the information, it will be specific to that airport. However, the general layout and everything is identical for airports around the world. So I hope you find this interesting and informative. If you do, please consider subscribing, hitting the like button on the videos. Leave a comment below if you want more of these types of tutorials. I always take that into consideration when coming up with these ideas, and we will take a look at doing them moving forward. So without further ado, let's get into this video. Okay, so we've come out of the airways, we've done the arrival, we've come down into the airport area. Now we have to get on the ground. And that's where the approach plate comes in, and the approach to the airport. There's a number of different types. We'll take a look at them at the end. But right now we're going to take a look at the standard ILS approach, which for the most part, that's the one you're going to do most of the time. It's the most common, and it's very interesting. Now, ILS stands for Instrument Landing System. And how the ILS works is that there is a transmitter at the airport that is sending out, we'll call it a beam. They used to call it riding the beam down to the airport. Sending out a beam. It's actually sending out two beams. One of them tells the airplane if you are left or right of the runway. The other one tells the airplane if it is above or below the glide slope, bringing it down to the runway. So this relies on transmitters at the airport sending out a signal that the aircraft will pick up. And the good thing about this is that pretty much all airplanes can use the ILS. Even the airplanes I learned to fly in, simple steam gauge Cessna 172 with no displays and no fancy equipment and stuff, I could fly an ILS in it because I had a receiver that would pick it up, and I'd have the needles, and I could follow the needles down. The more complicated ones and some of the different ones we'll look at in a bit, you can't do that in those types of airplanes because it has to have databases on board. But let's look at the ILS chart first, because a lot of this will apply across all the different types of approaches. So once again, as per normal, at the top of the chart on the left, it gives you the airport name, the airport identifier. In the center, it gives you the date and the effective date sometimes, gives you the chart number, and then on the right you can see the location of where you are and what this is. ILS runway 23. So again, as you were doing your briefings before you come down, you would say, you're at Toronto, you're using the ILS runway 23, and it is the 15 May 2020 chart 11-6, and the other pilot would confirm yes, they have the same chart. These change as well. You have to confirm the dates and make sure you're on the most up-to-date one. And sometimes there's more than one approach, so you may find an ILS Zulu, an ILS Yankee, an ILS X-Ray. There's variances for each one. Some of them depend on time, some of them depend on different waypoints being in use. Who knows, but you have to make sure that you are on the correct one. So next we have the information section. We'll go across all the boxes. Again, you've got the ATIS information. Underneath it says London Radio. It gives the frequency for London Radio, which is the general travel frequency for this area in case you need it. Toronto arrival. So those are the frequencies you'd be using to contact them. So the air traffic control from Toronto Center would be bringing you down on the star, and then they would be saying, contact Toronto arrival. Toronto arrival would then take you over, bring you in closer. You'd be finishing up down the star, getting ready to come in. They'd have you up to the point where you're just turned around facing the runway, and then they would tell you to go to the next set of frequencies, which you can see, which is Toronto Tower. Toronto Tower would bring you in down the rest of the way onto the runway, and when you exit the runway, they turn you over to Toronto ground. So you can see all the frequencies are there, very quickly able to access them and have them handy. Under that, we have the information. So starting from the left, you can see lock. That's localizer. This is the frequency that the aircraft is scanning for the localizer. And it also has those letters underneath, IYZ, India, Yankee, Zulu. That is the identifier for the ILS. Remember, this is Toronto. When you're coming in this way, you are facing 3 different ILSs. There's the ILS for runway 23, there's the ILS for runway 24 right, and there's the ILS for runway 24 left. All 3 are on different frequencies, all 3 have different identifiers. And this is one way you check. A lot of the aircraft that people will be flying, which are the airliners, when it comes up and it's showing that it's receiving the signal on the frequency, it will also display those letters. And that is how you confirm that you are on the right localizer. Next to that is your final approach course, 237. A lot of times you have to enter that in as well, so that the aircraft knows the course it should be flying. Next to that, it has some other information. It's giving you an altitude. So at Otmach, it says you should be at 1970 feet on the glide slope. So that's a reference point so that you can cross-check that you are at the correct altitude on your descent. Next to that, it says it's an ILS DME, which means that your aircraft will display distance. Some ILSs do not have DME, so it won't give you a distance to the runway. In that case, you do things like tune in a local VOR, so it'll give you an estimate down to the airport. And it says refer to minimums, so it wants you to refer to the minimums for the airport as well. And then next to that, our airport elevation of 569 feet. And TVZE, which is touchdown zone, the elevation there is 558 feet. So the touchdown zone here is, 11 feet lower than the reference point for the airport. Next to that, on the right, is your minimum safe altitudes again for the Toronto Airport area in specific, not just the approach, but around the airport. You can see north, east, and sort of south, it's 3,100 feet, and southwest, it's 2,800 feet. And then along the bottom, you can see your altitude is set in inches, so that is a reminder, especially for international aircraft flying from Europe, that we are not in millibars, we're in hectopascals. So we run inches of mercury in North America instead of millibars. Transition flight level 18 is flight level 180, and transition altitude is 18,000 feet. So generally speaking, As you climb up, you're going to switch from feet to flight levels at 18,000, and as you come down, you're going to switch from flight levels to feet at 18,000 feet. Below that, you'll see what gives you some information about the type of approach. It says radar required, minimum safe altitudes. It tells you simultaneous approaches with runway 24 right or 24 left, so they do run both runways at the same time. It gives you other information about the localizers and stuff like that. Sandwiched in between, and this is where you would find it on almost all the charts, is the missed approach. You'll find the missed approach information in two places on the chart. One is a very quick reminder set of bullet points. Three places. One is a quick reminder bullet points. One is written in text, which is what we're going to look at first. And then the other one's in the diagram itself. So this is the missed approach. So if you're coming in and you've got to say, see the ground by 500 feet off the ground, and you get to 500 feet and the aircraft calls out minimums and you look out and you can't see anything, you're on a missed approach. Or there's an airplane on the runway still and you see it, or somebody pulls out, or somebody was too slow getting off. This is what you're going to do. So it says you're going to climb to 1,100 feet heading 237, which is the runway heading. Then you're going to make a right turn to 3,000 feet, and you're going to intercept the outbound YYZ VOR on the 287 radial to ink dot. So this is where tuning in the VORs and stuff all come into play. So it gives you how to get out of the area and get out to somewhere safe where you can do what you have to do so that ATC can resequence you into the approach. And we'll take a look at that a little bit further in a minute. So the next section down is the diagram of the approach. You can see for where we're coming in, we're going to be turned by ATC, and they will have us heading, usually it's about a 30-degree intercept angle. So we'd be flying at either 267 degrees, or if we were coming in from the north, 207 degrees, and the approach mode would pick it up. The airplane would start to follow the localizer in, and we'd probably hit new deck, and you can see underneath new deck it says D15.7. That's 15.7 miles out, and it says YTP after that, so that's 15.7 miles from the YTP VOR. Now if you look down by the airport, you'll notice the YTP VOR is at the other end of the runway. It's actually at the head of the 05 runway end. So you're going to have that extra 10, 11,000 feet. You're going to be that much shorter. So 10, 11,000 feet, or 10,000 to 11,000 feet, that's almost 2 miles. So if you're tuned into that VOR and it says you're 10 miles from it, you're actually about 8 miles from the end of the runway. Something you have to bear in mind. So you're going to follow that down. You're going to go through Kelvy, then you're going to come to Vetvu, then Omtok, and if you remember, we looked at that. On the glide slope, it says you should be at 1,970 feet at that point, and you come all the way down to the runway. A few other bits of information located on here. It shows you the 2 runways. It gives you the VOR frequencies. There's 2 of them there. It gives you that little, almost like a Egyptian cartouche there on the middle right with the arrow pointing up to the beam path. Gives you the heading, it gives you the frequency, and it gives you the identifier of the ILS. Some other little descriptions on the map of the surrounding area. You can see your minimum safe altitude, again, 3,100 north and around, and then down in the southwest, 2,800 feet. And then down at the bottom, because that is part of the missed approach, it's included that hold point and the way you do your hold there in the event of a missed approach. So under that is now going to be your glide slope information. So tells you in case your glide slope is not functional and you're on localizer only, it gives you altitudes you should be at as you're coming in. So from the YTP DME, 3 miles out, you should be at 980 feet. 4 miles out, 1310. 5 miles out, 1640. 6.1 miles out, 2000 feet. So in case the glide slope's not working, it's a quick way of judging your way down on your descent. Below that, you have an actual diagram of the glide slope. So at new deck waypoint, you should be at 3,000 feet. Then you should pass Calvi at 3,000 feet, and then just after that, you'll intercept the glide slope, and you will start your descent. You're going to be flying at 237, and you can see it brings you down. It shows you at Omtok, you should be at that 1970. Quick reference check as you come down, and then it shows your minimum descent altitude. You got the little arrow going up, so that's roughly around where you should be either committed to landing or going around on a missed approach. It tells you your elevation of your touchdown zone and where everything is. And under that, in the box, again, it's a little bit of a reference information. So if you are coming in at 140 knots, say you're flying the Airbus A320, 737, something along those lines, and you're doing 140 knots coming in, it says the ILS glide slope, you should be doing a 3-degree glide slope, and you should be descending around 743 feet per minute. If you're just on a localizer and you're working those other informations, it'll be about a 310, 3.1 degree slope, and you should be at about 768 feet per minute descent, vertical descent down. So that just gives you some rough, again, a little bit of knowledge so you can calculate where you're going. This is the third place you find your missed approach. This is the pictorial reminder. So it tells you the type of lights coming in that you should be seeing as you approach the end of the runway. And again, remember when I read out the missed approach, straight ahead, or climb to 1,100 feet. And then the next one says on a 237 heading. And then you make a right turn to 3,000 feet, and then here's your intercept, the YYZ VOR on 112.15 on the 287 radio. That is your immediate missed approach, and then you would continue off out to Ink Dot, where you would enter the hold. Or ATC vectors if they gave it to you. Now at the bottom here is where you find your minimum information. So you're always looking for, at what point, if I'm on an ILS and I'm in bad weather, do I need to be able to see the runway? Sometimes there's more than one section. Sometimes there's 3, 4, 5, depending on the actual approach. In this case, we have 2. So this is a Cat 1 ILS, just a straight ILS runway. You cannot do auto lands on this one. So it's showing you 2 sets of information. It's showing you on the right side, let's go left side first. So on the left side, it's showing you ILS DME. So if you were coming in on the ILS with your DME, so it's telling you how far out you are and everything's working great. Your decision height would be 758 feet. So you would punch that in, and you would enter it into the baro section, so it's reading off your actual barometric altitude. So 578 feet, which would be about 200 feet off the ground. So you're coming in, and everything's going good, and that's what you want. And underneath, you can also see it says RVR. So it says your RVR is 26 or a half. So that's 2,600 feet or a half mile. So when you're landing, you need to have at least 2,600 feet straight line visibility out in front of you, or half a mile. and you have to be able to pick up the points on the ground. There's a couple things you have to be able to pick up: the approach lights, runway lights, end markers, all that type of stuff, and to be able to land. And you have to do that before you hit 758 feet. On the left, you'll see there's a C and D. Those are your aircraft categories. So things like the A320 and the 737 are all Category C. Bigger aircraft like the 787-10, the 747, the A350, I believe, are D, heavier aircraft. Sometimes those are different. In this case, they're the same. So for the next section, I'm not sure what high ALS out means, but obviously you don't have the same fidelity because it's got a higher altitude you have to be committed by, and you have to be able to see further. So things are not as accurate. You need a little bit more leeway to get yourself straight in. On the right, you can see it says lock glide slope out plus DME. So your localizer is working. You know your distance, but you don't have a glide slope. So now things have changed a bit. You need even a higher amount. You can see you need 980 feet, which is 422 feet above the runway. And you need 50,000 feet, or basically 1 mile. And again, if the high ILS is out, you need a mile and a quarter. So obviously your best bet would be the ILS DME full, and everything's working fine. Those would give you the option to go down the lowest with the least visibility in case you need it. So before we wrap up, let's take a look at some of the other approaches. As I mentioned, the ILS approaches is the most common one you're going to get. So you can see this one's a little bit more complicated, but you should now be able to pick out some of the information you're going to need. One thing to notice at the top right, it says it's the ILS DME or localizer DME for runway 09 right. So you can do either a ILS or a localizer approach. A localizer approach is where you use the localizer to get into the airport up nice and close, and then it's basically you're doing a visual approach after that, or a circle to land, which is a visual approach. So thing to point out on this one though is at the bottom you can see the multiple categories. So same as the other one, you had the Cat 1, which was the standard ILS, and then beside that the localizer. But further to the left you have Cat 2, and then to the left of that you have Cat 3A, and to the left of that you have Cat 3B. So these are always traveling from left to right into the most precise, or the lowest you can go to the highest you can go, the most restrictive. So Cat 3B is basically your full auto land. So you can set the airplane up for a full auto land and it will land on the runway and do its thing. Since London gets a lot of fog and the visibility is probably right down, it will allow it to go right down to the runway and land itself. You can see though you need a runway visibility range of 75 meters. So you still have to be able to see a little bit for taxi, but you can go right down. Cat 3A, you need a little bit more visibility on the ground, and you have to be able to see your environment by 50 feet. Then you move on to Cat 2. You need 300 meters of visibility on the ground. You can get down to 100 feet before you have to go into your missed approach. Cat 1, again, you've got your full, you've got if something's out and if something's happening or the ALS is out, it gives you the different options of the different types. Then you've got your localizer. Then next to that you've got your visual approach. So you have to be, if you're doing your circle to land, you have to be at 850 feet visible on the runway, and you can see everything and your ground distance and all that type of stuff. But it's a standard ILS, as you should be able to read it by now. You can see everything and figure out what's going on. Again, this is the one you're going to see most of the time. The next one you're going to see is the RNAV, or what's now being referred to as the RMP. And this is it here. This is an approach that does not depend on your aircraft receiving a beam from the airport. This is all based on the internal aircraft navigation system. And this is why older, simpler planes can't do these. They don't have the databases with the information required and contained in them. So again, at the top, you're going to find the same information: frequencies, restrictions, altitudes, missed approach procedures, special instructions, your safe altitude information, dates, names, the type of landing. You can see it's the RNP Zulu runway 08 for this airport. This is Innsbruck. We're landing between the mountains, as you can see on the diagram. And basically what this is this is going to follow waypoints held within the aircraft. So these are GPS waypoints. The aircraft is going to follow them. So on the diagram, it's set, you can see we come in at LMM, and then we're basically going to fly to all the waypoints along here, the WI-751, WI-752, WI-753. There are some speed restrictions on some of them, and it does give you headings, but this is how you get down the valley. So you can imagine flying in here in cloud. The aircraft is going to follow its own navigation down. And at the bottom, you can see it shows you the path, your distances between the waypoints, and where you should be heading. And again, you've got the information located next to, at the bottom left, next to your diagram of the slope. It tells you your descent angle should be 3.6 degrees. If you're traveling at 140 knots, you should be descending at 892 feet per minute. Gives you your missed approach information, which is the dotted line on the diagram, and your landing information. So you have to be at 2,900 feet, which is 993 feet above the runway. You have to be able to see the runway. Gives you your 2,400 meter visibility. And D-level aircraft, the bigger ones, do not fly into this airport, so it's not applicable. They can't make it in. So this would be how you would get in. These are coming more and more popular in that they don't have to put the equipment in and test it at the airports. There's a lot of testing. They undergo monthly certifications to make sure they're accurate. This relies on the aircraft to do it themselves. So you're starting to find these more, especially in areas like this. You couldn't put an ILS in here if you wanted to. You don't have the room, and there's mountains in the way, and the aircraft have to weave their way around and get in. And there's some that are a lot worse than this, but this is kind of a famous one for Innsbruck. So that's the RNAV, or the RNP approach. Next after that is an NDB. Now an NDB approach uses what's called NDBs, non-directional beacons. So think of your AM radio antenna broadcast. You cannot get a distance measuring information from it. You cannot rely on it to do anything more than just give you a bearing. So in most airplanes back in the day, they had what they call ADF, audio direction finders. And you could tune in the frequency. So if we look at this chart, you can see the NDBs are there in the center. The one on the left, KW, is frequency 320. So if you tune in 320, the needle will point to that beacon, no matter where you are. It just says, yeah, it's over that way. Now the interesting thing about these, as a little side note, those are AM radio frequencies. Now AM radio starts at 680, but the receivers go up that high. So you could actually tune in on these receivers. If the aircraft had them, you could tune in local AM radio stations. And the arrow would point to where their transmitter was. I did that when I was doing my night rating. I had to fly circuits for 5 hours in the middle of winter, so I used to listen to the Maple Leafs hockey games while I was doing it. These are lower frequencies than AM radio, but they're within that same area, which is why they can pick them up. So basically what you're going to be doing is flying to using these as a way to get yourself down. So I'm not exactly sure how you would find your glide slope, but basically you'd fly over the first one at 4,930 feet. You'd head at 288. You'd fly out down to 1972. You'd fly out for 2 minutes. You'd do a turn. You'd come back in at 108, and then you would line up using those frequencies, the arrow pointing you in as you flew in towards the beacons. not really used much anymore. It's old technology and it's not really much in use. And again, your minimums are located down at the bottom. Again, another type of approach you'd have, and these are the Hanoi charts for Vietnam, are VOR approaches. Similar to the NDBs, except this time you're using VORs, which give you specific radials you can follow in, so they're a little bit more accurate, and sometimes you can actually get DME information from them. So here you can see you would fly in at one of these two altitudes. You'd fly in over the NOB VOR, then you'd fly down till you were 13 miles, D13 NOB. So you'd fly down until you were 13 miles out, and you'd be at 2960. You'd make your turn, so that when you're coming back in on 108 degrees, you'd be at 1970, and then at this distance out, you start down on your descent at a 2.99 degree descent. Then you've got your minimums. And again, these are visual approaches at the end of the day. You have to be able to see the ground. You're not going to be flying right down to the ground in bad weather. You got to break out of, say, an overcast layer, and then you would do a visual approach into the runway. These aren't very much in use anymore either. And lastly, you can have what's called a visual approach. So sometimes you don't get charts for these, sometimes you do. This is a very famous one. This is the River Visual at Washington, D.C. Very scenic. As you can see, it's telling you what you do, and basically you're following the river, and it's all done in good weather. It's all done in visual. Washington has a lot of prohibited areas, restricted airspace, and basically the easiest way in on this runway is just to follow the river and come in. So you would come in on the upper left at Fergie. It says be at 3,000 feet. You keep going down to the river, and then you would follow the river. And it's visual flight. You'd be descending. You'd fly over the Chain Bridge at 1,800 feet. You get down to the Georgetown Reservoir. You'd be at 1,500 feet. You get to the Key Bridge. You'd be at 900 feet. You'd make the turn heading southeast. You pass over these bridges here, continuing to descend down, and you basically just fly a visual approach into the runway. It is very scenic as you come in. Lots of landmarks to be seen. And you can see in the notes at the bottom, aircraft may visually follow the river to the airport, or may proceed via the RNAV, which is another approach, which would have nav points. You could do it in bad weather, but that would only take you to a certain waypoint, and then you would have to fly the visual for the rest of it anyway. So it is another type of chart, not seen too often, but this is probably one of the most famous ones that you would find. So thank you very much for watching this series on how to read charts. I'm by no means am I an expert. It's just knowledge I've gotten from talking to people, putting it into use in the flight sim world, and just seeing these charts over my flying career and getting the information I need off them for my VFR flying. Hopefully you'll be able to use this to make yourself a better pilot and fly into some areas that you're not familiar with. You don't always have to go to the same place. The charts are there. They'll help you get in and out of where you're going so you can enjoy the great world. Thanks again for watching. If you did find them useful, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel to get more of this type of content, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.